this time, what we have is a presentation. So I'm going to be inviting straight away into the next one, which is a presentation which is titled as Blockchain, whether it's poison or solution to climate concerns. So I guess a very, very relevant topic indeed when we are talking about climate and blockchain. So to bring in his perspective and his views, I'm going to be inviting Mr. Tobias Bauer, who's the principal Blockchain Founders Fund, and I'm going to invite him to join us onto the stage and give us his views. Over to you. Any either of the, yeah, whichever you want, whichever side you prefer. Come on in.
Awesome. I need to adjust this a little bit with my height. No, I'm very, very excited to be here today. I flew all the way from Singapore. It's my first time in India. So I'm extremely excited. I'm going to stay for about 3 weeks. I'm going to go to Delhi, Mumbai, and really explore the country. I've already invested in 3 companies in India, and we raised a new fund, and we're going to deploy a lot more capital into early stage Indian blockchain startups, and we see amazing potential moving forward. Now, this topic today is quite an interesting one because it covers really what blockchain was meant to be, right? Blockchain in itself, without the crypto layer, was meant to bring transparency, auditability to the world, right? And like in a space with climate change where there's so much intransparency and so much ideas and perspectives, I think that's where like blockchain can have a tremendous adoption point. Now, obviously, I don't want to go in too much into detail. Everybody kind of knows that climate change has been very, very challenging across different parts of the world. We see tremendous numbers, which staggering and obviously not getting too much better over the last years, and it's sort of worsening. We've seen the hottest summer across the world. Even in Germany, where I come from, we had 45 degrees in one day, which has never happened before. And of course, a bunch of other things. I listed some of the numbers here. And I think, in my opinion, the worst thing is that 800 million people, is almost 11 to 12% of the people in the world, are going to be in risk of direct climate change. And we need to find a way to support that. And in my opinion, blockchain and the startup ecosystem around the world, and especially also in India, is a very, very interesting gateway of achieving this. Now, going into the most obvious problem of blockchain, what has been all around, if you talk about Bitcoin and Ethereum and like all these major blockchains, is that we use a proof of work, right? Which obviously costs tremendous computing power, electricity. That has been very, very challenging and been called out multiple times. And we've seen other blockchains being more focused on providing a sustainable blockchain. There's even one in India, it's called Fire. I don't know if you're familiar, it's a very early stage layer 1, which is trying to use the sustainability challenge. But people are changing, and Ethereum obviously is trying to move over to proof of stake as well. And I think that's sort of what we see, a tremendous adoption. Polygon, one of the most well-known Indian blockchain layers, is also getting a lot better in that sense, and has been already proven very, very successful and adoptable within the blockchain space. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of these blockchains, but there's Hive, Near, and Algorand, which are sort of the climate neutral blockchains in a sense, right? So Hive, for example, one of our companies called Splinterlands in a gaming space is built on Hive. It's a gasless blockchain. So for all the transactions they're doing, you don't pay any fee. And that's very, very important. I mean, Splinterlands is a gaming company. They're doing more transactions every day than a whole Ethereum network together. Just to give you an idea. And if that would cost people, it would obviously be jeopardizing the game experience. But at the same point, it makes it easier and uses less computing power to actually use such a blockchain. And Near Protocol, which is a very exciting one as well, which is Algorand, then the same sort of idea of bringing a little bit more climate neutrality to the blockchain space and move away from a proof of work concept towards a proof of stake concept. And I think that's what we've seen. I think it's a very interesting adoption layer where also a lot of community members now switching over, a lot of Big celebrities in the US have called it out and try to use a bit more of a neutral layer system. Now, I think that's probably one of the most interesting slides in my opinion. And so basically, we invested in a company called Checkit. Right? Checkit is an African-based company out of Nigeria. They are now pivoting into the Indian market, and they are bringing sustainability and traceability supply chains. They're already working with, SAP, Merck, which is a large pharmaceutical company, and India is here again on the forefront of introducing GS1 last year, which is basically a tracking regulatory for pharmaceutical companies. India, one of the big 3 pharmaceutical producers in the world, builds a tremendous market. Now, the same technology can be used to track climate impact. And Checkit is trying to do this in India, so they're going to go to India and trying to work with small and medium-sized businesses and helping them track their impact, as well as carbon dioxide certificates and other important metrics. We're very excited how this plays out, and if you guys are interested in some sort of tracking for your climate impact, would love to have an idea of what the biggest pain points are for you guys and how we can help and drive that forward. We also want to facilitate clean energy trading, which has been very, very difficult with agents taking a massive cut. If this can be put on a layer, it's a lot more easy, and we can save actual transaction costs, very similar to what blockchain in the finance space has already achieved, what we now need to do in the climate space. Flow Carbon, I don't know if you are familiar with that company, but everybody probably knows WeWork. So Adam Newman actually launched a new company and just recently got tremendous funding where he's basically tokenizing carbon credits on a blockchain, and has been very famous and supported by A16Z and Sequoia across the US. And now they're also pivoting towards the Asian markets to try to help companies actually tokenizing their footprint and their certificates and help trade and make it a way easier, more effective. Power Ledger is an interesting one. We're going to talk in a second again because they facilitate clean energy trading. And I'm going to put this up right here. Actually, before we go to Power Ledger, just a kind of high-level note about that. Climate financing has been something very, very important. Actually, we ran a study across our fund because a lot of climate-focused funds came up with a complaint to us and say, we can very, very difficult measure impact. And a lot of LPs come to us and say, how do you impact? Like, what's your real impact? And it's like, yeah, I mean, like, our companies raise a lot of funding and they get employees, so they obviously solve that kind of problem. No, but like, what is your impact and how we can measure it? So like, there's a bunch of different ideas we have in mind in order to properly measure impact, which then obviously results back to our limited partners and to the whole ecosystem in general. So we actually want to build out a sort of a blockchain tracking system where companies have to put in input and then we can trace that. But that's like very high level on a fund level. But if you can think this forward, it comes to a very interesting point of view where a lot of companies claim to use funds in order to improve climate, or like the impact on the climate, or the impact on their commission. But who can prove it? It's very, very difficult to actually come across and say, hey, I have deployed $100 million successfully and reduced my climate impact by X and X percent. Now, companies have been trying to solve that gap and try to bring all these transactions on a blockchain and try to make it audible. That being said, it still hasn't been done. We're also still looking at quite interesting topics in peer-to-peer lending, like how can we get engaged and invest in companies and help them transition? Because most of the times that's done through big exchanges and big companies, and kind of retail investors are being left out. And I think that's sort of what you should keep in mind from this presentation. Is really about what are the numbers, right? How many companies have been founded? How many companies made an impact in the space? So we identified over 3,000 climate tech startups in Southeast Asia and India. All of them are like between various stages. In Q2 or like in Q3, Q4 2020 until 2021, VCs invested $87 billion in climate tech startups. Right? So the appetite is gearing up. We know a lot of funds in our ecosystem who specifically launch now funds to support climate tech startups, which is fantastic. And a lot of big corporates are becoming LPs and investing in those funds and supporting these projects moving forward. And we are going to carve out a small portion of the fund as well to dedicate directly to that within the blockchain space. And now this is probably the most important part because all these numbers mean nothing, but we have seen over a 200% year-on-year growth of these invested capital. So like the people who invested, obviously not in every company, but on average in the climate tech space, within the startup space, they have seen tremendous return on their investment. And I think that's what is quite comforting to see, because a lot of people in our space arguing, I don't want to invest in climate tech companies because they're going to take 5, 10, 20 years to mature. It's very difficult to sell. It's typically tied to government and organizations or NGOs, but it's actually not directly the case. We see a lot of private sectors and retail investors trying to get into the space. Sales cycles are decreasing because awareness is increasing, and things has just gotten smoother than they were before. But this hasn't fully reached the investor side, and we want to see more adoption moving forward. Now, these are probably one of the most exciting companies in the space, and I want to have sort of the attention on Power Ledger, which I mentioned before, because it's actually an Indian company which has been very, very successful, where they launched a pilot in India and trying to eventually own homeowners with solar panels to trade and make it more effective for all of them. And that's been basically done on a blockchain, on a ledger, and has been gone tremendous success across India. And I think that could be rolled out over multiple countries, not just India, but also Southeast Asia. I don't know, how many guys have heard about this company before, Power Ledger? Is that something which got attention in India, or is it something which is not yet? Awesome. Very, very cool. And food tracks is something which is indirectly tied, or like actually directly tied to climate change, is food waste. Food waste is still a massive problem across the globe, and most of the food waste is simply just burned, which then obviously increases the carbon impact. And we're looking at a bunch of different companies right now who solve the problem of what to do with food waste and how can we allocate it more effective, right? And we invested in a company in Canada which are essentially tackling on this problem. What they're doing is they're putting all the expiry dates on a blockchain and figuring out when is the food eventually going to be uneatable, and how can we then distribute the food still to people who are in need before throwing it away. Obviously, it is people are going to say, like, how do you track that? It's difficult. Yeah, that'd be. But I think if we're going to figure out how effectively use food, which we wouldn't touch because we throw it away because it doesn't look as great anymore, or because the date of the expiry isn't done yet, that's massive millions of tons a year of food which you can still eat, but we throw it away because it doesn't fit our supermarket shelves anymore. And that company is tackling it. I have to admit, it is challenging for them because a lot of people get a lot of pushback, but I think the idea in general is massive and can have a tremendous impact into the space. I think Arbol is probably also worth mentioning. They basically help businesses manage their energies effective, and really trying that in a blockchain manner. I really suggest, like, have a look at these companies and try to understand what they're doing. Some of the ideas are a bit more abstract right now, especially for like even us as a fund, but there's so much potential we can do. And I think especially the Indian government has been quite on the forefront of using blockchain to track some of these challenges and trying to be involved. Maybe not so much on the crypto side, but right now we're talking purely on the blockchain side for the most part. Now, obviously, blockchain is not just blockchain, we also have crypto, right? So I want to quickly touch on how NFTs and gaming are supporting the climate change, or like the climate impact within the retail and the private space. So NFTs are essentially, the ownership in the blockchain space. You can directly identify that is yours, and NFTs has become very successful because people bought, Bored Apes and all these like massive projects, but there's no real utility to all of these projects, right? You're essentially holding a JPEG and nobody knows what to do with it. But now, how can we use that technology and actually have impact? So Rarible is a company typically started out as an NFT project, is now pivoting into how can we use the technology to support that impact. And now you can basically purchase carbon removal directly from their NFT marketplace, right? And like it now covers the utility point I mentioned, right? You're not just covering a JPEG, but you actually are able to purchase a carbon removal. And that can tremendous impact within the space. Digital for Art Climate. I don't know if anyone heard of this before. It's also a quite interesting project within the space. They're basically using blockchain technology to turn art into digital assets and NFTs, right? So it started off as an art project, but then it fully pivoted into the space of how can we have impact. So now we can basically collect them and trade them in order to have an impact on mobilization, youth engagement, and climate empowerment. That's more like a community-driven project and has like not direct impact because you're not purchasing any certificates or any carbon impact, but it drives the community with an art which is related to the space, and that typically has seen having the biggest impact on a grand scale of things. Even like green apes, it's not investment advice, but it's just an interesting idea that like projects like these are also pivoting into the space of like, hey, how can we use our projects to bring utility and bring awareness into the space, right? And I think the big point in the NFT and sort of in the crypto side of climate impact is still awareness, right? We see a lot of metaverses even right now where people can go in and you can grow trees by depositing sort of coins in that sense, and then people plant real trees in real life, right? These are all concept stages yet and very, very early, but a lot of different projects are thinking about is how can we put this in a gamified manner and how can we take ownership and real NFT technology to support projects down the road with such a climate impact. And I think that's kind of what we need to go. Although we are early, I love the way that a lot of people and very smart minds thinking about how to use that and actually give an impact within using technology on like emerging technology. So I think everybody has to answer for yourself if blockchain is poison or a benefit for climate change. But summarizing it, yes, we had early challenges and high electricity usage for actually running this type of technology, but we understood that and tried to move away slowly but steadily from introducing a mechanism which makes it easier and less energy efficient. And a lot of companies like Near Protocol, Hive are already incorporating that, and now projects are able to build on such chains and such layers in order to enable that. We even use crypto and blockchain in the space to drive adoption forward, to build companies which either track, help finance, or even bring gamified aspect and ownership into the NFT and into the climate change space. And we need to have a lot more funding out there to support more than 3,000 companies down the road and help especially countries like India, Southeast Asia, where I see so much potential because there's a lot of young people, tech-savvy people, great developers who can build such technologies and where impact can and need to be felt. So that was a high-level overview about how we look at the space and what companies are already operating. I hope it was useful. Happy to answer any questions, but I think my time is up. So I give it back to the moderators, and thanks again for listening. Appreciate that short little overview of how we see the impact using blockchain and digital assets.